Why is it that you can spend hundreds of hours studying price action, backtesting your strategy, and building a model that genuinely you believe has an edge, but the second real money is on the line, it's like a completely different version of you shows up? You hesitate on trades you know you should take. You move stops that you promised yourself you wouldn't move. You skip the A-plus setup because you're afraid to lose. And then 5 minutes later, you're jumping into a mediocre trade because you're afraid of missing out. Sometimes one perfectly normal losing trade turns into a tilt session. By the end of the day, you've completely abandoned your trading plan that you've worked so hard to build. And sure, psychology is the reason, emotions, right? But how do you actually fix that without some fluff answer like meditate? Are there actually tools that we can use to combat emotions and psychology in trading? Well, in this video today, I'm going to teach you the underlying reason why you can be profitable in demo, backtesting, or an eval account, and then still wreck yourself with funded accounts or real money. And once you understand the underlying reason, which isn't that you lost 3 trades in a row and then you tilted, only then can you actually apply real tools and real strategies to bypass the psychology issue and see consistency in your trading. For me in my trading journey, and it's a journey I'm still on, so please don't take me for a guru or anything, I was struggling earlier this year in the live markets. So I went on backtested almost 2 years straight in a matter of a couple months. And I was stupid profitable in backtesting. And out of frustration and maybe even desperation, I actually became genuinely curious. Why was this happening? I could obviously read price, I knew my model well, and I had a positive edge in expectancy. And at the time, I was working with a coach, and I brought this problem to them. And they asked me one simple question. Why do you want to win this trade? And I began to explain that if I won the trade, I made 400, and if I lost, I would be down 200. He asked me if I lost $200 today, would I care? And I said, probably not. And then he asked me if I lost $200, does that mean I lose the account? And I said, no, there's still a $2,200 buffer. And he then asked me if I won $400, would my life change? And of course, the answer was no. And then he asked, so why do you want to win this trade? I paused and I thought, and the answer stunned me. I thought back to some of my trading sessions, and this was the part that frustrated me more than anything. It wasn't that I didn't know what I was supposed to do. It was that I knew exactly what I should do and still found myself doing the opposite. And maybe you've experienced this too. You're sitting in a trade and you know exactly where your stop belongs. You know moving it violates your rules. You know you've seen this setup recovered dozens of times during your backtesting or live trading. And yet there's this overwhelming urge to just give it a little bit more room. Or maybe you tell yourself before the session starts, 2 losses and I'm done. And then 2 losses happen. 20 minutes later, you're taking a third trade that wasn't even a part of your plan. It's almost like there's 2 different versions of you. There's the calm, logical version of you that builds the trading plan over the weekend. The version that sets the rules, defines the risk, and says, this week I'm finally going to trust my process. And then Monday morning comes, the market opens, 1 trade goes against you, and suddenly that person disappears. That's what drove me crazy. And I remember thinking, how can I know exactly what the right decision is while I'm actively making the wrong one? It didn't make sense. Until I realized that I wasn't actually addressing the right problem in my trading. So here's the realization that I had that day. Losing 1 trade wasn't what hurt. What hurt was everything I believed that the losing trade meant. And without realizing it, my brain had started to create this chain reaction. I lose the trade, which means my payout is further away. And if my payout is further away, then becoming consistently profitable feels further away. And if becoming consistently profitable feels further away, then providing for my family feels further away. And if that's true, maybe this whole journey isn't going to work after all. Now, think about that for a second. Objectively, like what happened? I lost 1 trade, maybe 1 R. Exactly what my backtesting said would happen 38% of the time, nothing unusual. But psychologically, that 1 trade had become something completely different. It had become evidence. Evidence that maybe I wasn't making progress, that I wasn't good enough, that everyone who doubted me was right, that I was going to fail and let my family down. Evidence that maybe I'd invested years of my life chasing something that was never going to happen. Once I saw that, everything clicked. The trade wasn't hurting because of the money. The trade was hurting because of the meaning I had attached to it. And after this realization, trading became much easier and much more stress-free. Not because I became fearless, not because I suddenly stopped feeling emotions, but because my trade stopped carrying so much emotional weight with each and every trade. Now, real quick, this is where I insert a plug for you to like and subscribe. But that's only a reminder if my content is genuinely of value to you, so that way it can spread to others and I can help people just like you. Now, think about it like this. Imagine I hand you a basketball and I ask you to make 1 free throw. Not a big deal. You might make it, you might miss it. Either way, life goes on. Now imagine I hand you the exact same basketball standing in the exact same place, but before you shoot it, I tell you, if you make this shot, your family will never have to worry about money again. Like, did the shot get harder? No. The basket is the same height, right? The distance is exactly the same. Your ability didn't suddenly disappear. The only thing that changed was the meaning attached to the shot. Because the meaning got heavier, execution got harder. And I honestly believe that's exactly what happens in trading. The market isn't any different than it was yesterday. Your strategy hasn't suddenly stopped working. Your edge hasn't disappeared overnight. But somewhere along the way, every trade quietly stopped being just a trade. It became a test of whether you were finally going to make it and if all the sacrifice was worth it. Ultimately, a test as to whether you could provide the future that you envisioned for yourself and your family. Now, that's an impossible amount of weight to put on one trade. And here's the part that I really changed my perspective. And I don't think most traders are trying to make money anymore. I think they're trying to escape a feeling, because when every losing trade feels like evidence that you're falling behind, your brain doesn't desperately want another winning trade. It desperately wants relief. And that's a completely different mindset. You're no longer trading objectively. You're trying to make the uncomfortable feeling go away. And that's exactly where revenge trading, hesitation, moving stops, forcing entries, and blowing accounts begin. Because here's the truth that changed everything for me. Execution doesn't become easier because your strategy improves. Execution becomes easier when your trades lose their emotional weight. And once I understood that, I stopped asking myself how to become more disciplined. And I started asking much better questions. Why does this trade feel so heavy in the first place? Because if I could remove that weight, maybe execution would finally take care of itself. And that's really the question that we have to answer. Why does a trade feel so heavy in the first place? Because once you understand that, so many of the behaviors you've probably been fighting for years, they suddenly start to make sense. And looking back, I don't think I was actually afraid of losing money. I was afraid of what losing money said about me. And there's a huge difference between those two things. If I told you before the market opened that today you were going to lose 1 hour, but you also knew it was a perfectly executed trade that fit your plan exactly, logically, you should be okay with that. After all, that's how probabilities work. And even the best traders lose, even the profitable systems have losing trades. But most of us don't experience a loss that way. Instead, the thoughts start showing up almost immediately. What if I'm losing my edge? What if I'm slipping? What if I just can't be disciplined? Maybe I'm farther away than I thought. Notice how quickly the conversation shifts away from the trade itself. Within minutes, you're no longer evaluating a setup, you're evaluating yourself. And that's the trap. The trade has quietly become an identity test. One of the biggest mindset shifts that I ever had was realizing that my brain wasn't actually trying to make money while I was trading. It was trying to protect me. Our brains are wired to protect our identity, right? They constantly look for evidence that we're safe, capable, accepted, and moving in the right direction. And that's incredibly useful in some areas of life, but in trading, it can become a disaster because your subconscious is linked to trading success with your identity. Then every loss feels like an attack on who you are. You're no longer just losing a trade. You're losing certainty, confidence, and you're losing that feeling that you're making progress. And when your brain senses this threat, it doesn't respond logically. It responds emotionally. Not because you're weak or lack discipline, but because it believes something important is under attack. And this is why I don't actually think revenge trading or tilting or emotional trading, it starts because we're angry. I think it starts because we're desperate to make an uncomfortable feeling disappear. And think about the last time that you had one of those sessions. You took a perfectly reasonable loss. Now, for about 5 seconds, everything was fine. And then your brain started talking. Come on, get it back. You can't finish the day like this. Just one more trade. You'll feel better if you make it back. That last sentence is a dangerous one. You'll feel better. Do you see what's happening? At that moment, you're not trying to make money anymore. You're trying to regulate an emotion, to erase self-doubt. You're trying to remove fear, and you're trying to prove something to yourself. The market has become therapy. And the problem with using the market as therapy is that it gives inconsistent emotional rewards. Sometimes it rewards terrible behavior, and sometimes it punishes great behavior. If you need the market to make you feel okay, you're giving it a job it was never designed to do. And here's what I think happens to a lot of traders without them even realizing it. You start learning to trade because, you're excited about it, the possibilities. You imagine freedom. You imagine providing for your family with the freedom to do whatever you want with them. and you imagine finally taking control of your life. There's nothing wrong with that, of course. But somewhere along the way, those dreams quietly became attached to your trading. Now, your subconscious creates a new equation. Trading success equals freedom equals family. Trading success equals financial security. Trading success equals proving I can do this. It equals proving you weren't crazy for chasing the dream. Now ask yourself, what happens when you lose a trade? Your brain doesn't just experience a small financial setback. It experiences a threat to everything on the other side of that equation. And that's why the emotional reaction feels so much bigger than the actual dollar amount. The loss itself isn't crushing you. The story you're telling yourself about the loss is. And this was probably the hardest thing for me to admit. Every losing trade had quietly become evidence that maybe I'd never get there. And when your brain starts collecting that kind of evidence, it naturally wants to erase it. And that's why your decision making deteriorates so quickly, because emotion is now driving the car. So then, what do you do about this? How do you create a pattern interrupt and override this primal brain? How do you actually remove that emotional weight? Because it's one thing to recognize that your identity has become tied to the trades. It's another thing entirely to break that connection. That's exactly what I want to show you next, because this is where trading finally started to feel different for me. Not because the market changed or my strategy changed, but because I completely changed what I expected each individual trade to prove. And if you're anything like me, you've probably watched tons of psychology videos before, controlling your emotions, being more disciplined, trust your process, right? Things like that. The problem is none of these are actually instructions, they're outcomes. It's like telling someone who's afraid of heights, just don't be afraid. And that's not helpful because it doesn't address why they're afraid of heights in the first place. For me, everything started changing when I stopped trying to eliminate emotions and instead started removing the unnecessary meaning that I had attached to each trade. Because remember, the heavier the meaning, the harder it becomes to execute objectively. So instead of trying to become more disciplined, I started building a process that made every trade feel lighter. And the first thing I started doing had nothing to do with the charts. It had to do with honesty. Outside of your trading session, ask yourself, what do losses mean to you? And the answer isn't you lost money or blew the account. Keep going deeper. Why does that matter? Because I want to become consistently profitable. Why does that matter? Because I want financial freedom. Why does that matter? Because I want to provide for my family. Why? Because I want to know all this sacrifice has been worth it for them. Now you're finding the real problem, the real reason. Notice how different that is from simply saying I lost a trade. One is about money. The other is about identity, purpose, and security. And those are completely different conversations. And once you see this chain clearly, it starts losing its power because you then realize the trade is not actually the thing you're worried about. So next, and this was probably the biggest shift I've had in my trading in a long time, was that for years, my subconscious believed these two statements were exactly the same. Becoming a consistently profitable trader and creating financial security for my family. They felt identical, but they were not. They were two completely different goals. And once I realized that these were two separate activities, the pressure immediately started to come down. My job wasn't to make my family's future happen today. My job was to execute on one good trade. That's it. I realized that my family's security was weighing on every single trade, and it shouldn't be. So likely now you've separated the two problems completely. What actionable steps can you actually take? First, this is where process over profits stopped being a motivational quote for me and became something practical. I realized that I'd been measuring the wrong thing. For years, every green day meant that I felt like I was a good trader, and every red day felt like I was a bad trader, and I questioned everything, and that was exhausting. So I completely changed my scoreboard. And instead of asking, did I make money today? I asked, how did I perform today? I stopped staring at my TradeZella P&L dashboard and focused solely on my Consistency Lab performance calendar. And I started asking, did I execute my edge, follow my risk, respect my stop, stay within my daily loss limits, and did I trade according to my plan? And at the end of the day, I had a grade, A+ through F-, and that's what I went to bed thinking about each night. Because here's the truth. The market decides your profits and you decide your process. One of those is outside your control, the other isn't. And if you want consistency, you have to build your confidence around the thing that you can actually control. That's execution, not the outcome. All right, so next and practically, You're likely assuming that this video so far even just implies the need for financial certainty when it comes to learning to trade. Because the irony is that most traders think, once trading starts working, then I'll finally stop feeling so much pressure. But honestly, it's actually the opposite. Less pressure leads to better execution, and better execution is what eventually makes the trading work. So ask yourself, where else can you create certainty? Maybe it's building an emergency fund, keeping a side income, a side hustle growing as you're working as a trader, working extra hours. Maybe it's simply having enough savings so that way one losing month doesn't feel catastrophic. Now, none of these things, they make you a better trader directly, but they do dramatically reduce the emotional meaning attached to every trade and prevent the trade from meaning more than it actually does. Because when trading stops feeling like your only chance, it finally becomes just trading again. And that's when your execution in real time looks like you're backtesting. Now, looking back now, I don't think my biggest breakthrough came from learning something new about the market. It came from learning something about myself, and it continues to do that. I wasn't struggling because I lacked discipline or because I needed another strategy. I was struggling because I had quietly turned every trade into a verdict on my family's future. And that's an emotional roller coaster that no one can sustain. And once I stopped asking every trade to tell me whether I was good enough or whether I was going to make it, everything became lighter. Not easier, lighter. I could finally let a losing trade simply be what it was, a statistically expected outcome inside of a profitable trading system. Nothing more, nothing less. So, if you've already validated your edge and you've already built your execution rules, then the next level isn't about finding a better system. It's about becoming the kind of trader who can consistently execute the system you already have. Because remember everything we've talked about, execution doesn't become easier because your strategy improves. It becomes easier because you improve. And you'll be amazed how much easier and simpler it becomes to follow your plan.